The wind howled like a living thing, tearing through the tall pines that crowded the mountainside. Snow fell in thick, unbroken sheets, blanketing the world in white. In the midst of this cold and silence stood a small cabin, perched on the edge of the forest like a forgotten secret. Its wooden walls were weathered, and smoke curled lazily from the chimney, a sign of life within. Inside, Omega moved quietly, her hands steady despite the shivering that ran through her body. The fire crackled and cast dancing shadows across the cabin's walls, filling the room with a warm, golden light. Outside, the blizzard raged, but here she was, safe, or at least as safe as she could be in her secluded life. Omega had lived alone for years, and she preferred it that way. The world beyond the forest seemed dangerous, filled with men of pride and power who would never understand someone like her. But solitude had a price. Each night, she faced the cold and the quiet, and the loneliness pressed against her heart like a heavy stone. Still, she found comfort in simple routines, tending her fire, preparing her meals, listening to the wind, and speaking to the animals that sometimes dared approach her cabin. That night, the wind carried a sound unlike any she had heard before, a low, pitiful whine that cut through the storm. Omega froze, her breath catching in her throat. She listened, her heart hammering. The sound came again, more desperate this time, followed by a soft, scraping noise against the snow. Her instincts told her to stay inside, safe by her fire. But her heart told her something else. It was a sound of suffering, of life clinging desperately to hope. Omega grabbed her thick cloak and opened the cabin door. The blizzard hit her face with icy fingers, stealing her breath. She squinted through the falling snow and saw it. A massive wolf, fur caked with ice, trembling violently, and its golden eyes wide with fear. The wolf's leg was bent unnaturally, and it moved with careful, painful steps. It seemed on the brink of collapse. Omega's chest tightened. She had always felt a connection with the creatures of the wild. But this was different. This was not just an animal, it felt like something more, something with a mind and a soul that understood pain as deeply as any human. Without thinking, Omega stepped into the snow. "Come here," she called softly. The wolf flinched at her voice but did not run. Step by step, she approached, her arms outstretched. "I won't hurt you," she whispered. Her voice was gentle, a thread of warmth against the biting cold. The wolf hesitated, shaking, its golden eyes never leaving her face. Then, with a shiver that made Omega's heart ache, it stumbled forward, letting her guide it toward the cabin. She lifted the animal's weight as best she could, carrying it inside, laying it by the fire. Steam rose from its wet fur, and it gave a low, exhausted growl. Omega knelt beside it, her hands trembling as she examined the injury. Its leg was swollen, frostbitten, and bleeding slightly from jagged ice that had cut into its paw. She tore strips from her cloak to bandage it and spoke softly, as if the words themselves could heal the beast. "You're safe now," she said. "You're safe with me." As she worked, a strange feeling settled over her, a sense that the wolf's golden eyes held a depth beyond the natural. There was intelligence there, almost human in its clarity. She paused, brushing ice from its fur, and swore she could hear the faintest echo of a voice, carried on the wind, whispering her name. But it was impossible. She shook her head and returned to her task, telling herself the cold was playing tricks on her mind. Hours passed. The storm outside continued, relentless, while the cabin glowed with warmth and quiet urgency. Omega fed the wolf what little food she had. Dried meat softened in warm water and stayed by its side as it ate, murmuring words of comfort. The creature's breathing grew steadier, though it still trembled under her hands. That night, she could not sleep. She sat by the fire, watching the wolf curl into a ball, the rhythm of its breathing slow but uneven. She wondered who, or what, it really was. Wolves were common in these parts, but never had she seen one with such size, such presence, or such eyes that seemed to pierce through to her soul. As midnight passed, a strange sensation filled the cabin. The firelight flickered oddly, and the shadows danced in unfamiliar patterns. Omega looked at the wolf and froze. Its eyes glowed faintly, golden and intense. And for a moment, it shifted slightly, in form not fully, but enough that her breath caught in her throat. She stumbled back, clutching the edge of the table. Then the shift passed. The wolf's form was normal again, but the air in the cabin felt charged, almost alive. Omega's heart raced. She could not explain what she had seen, and part of her wanted to run. But another part, the part that had brought the wolf inside in the first place, kept her rooted in place. Hours later, exhausted but unable to sleep, Omega leaned back against the wall. The wolf stirred beside her, and she reached out, her hand brushing its fur. A shiver ran through her, not from the cold, but from something deep and inexplicable. She whispered, "You're not like other wolves, are you?" The creature's ears twitched, and for a fleeting instant, it seemed to nod, as if it understood every word. Then it settled back down, eyes closing slowly, trusting her. Omega watched, heart aching with a mixture of wonder and fear. She had no idea what she had done or what would come of it, but she knew one thing. She had made a choice, and that choice would change everything. She finally drifted toward sleep, the fire casting long shadows, and the wind outside wailing against the walls. But sleep was uneasy. In her dreams, the wolf's eyes glowed brighter, and a voice, low, commanding, and strangely familiar, echoed in her mind. "Omega." She woke with a start, heart pounding. The cabin was silent, the fire reduced to glowing embers. The wolf was gone. Panic gripped her. But before she could call out, a shadow moved in the doorway. The door burst open, snow and wind tearing into the cabin. A figure stood there, tall and imposing, cloaked in furs that shimmered like frost under moonlight. Golden eyes, human yet wolf-like, met hers with a mixture of fury and something else, something deeper, something almost impossible to name. "Who dares take what belongs to me?" The voice thundered, low and resonant, carrying a command that made her knees weaken. Omega's lips parted, but no words came. She could only stare, caught between fear and awe, as the snow swirled around him like a living storm. The wolf she had sheltered, the creature she had saved from death, was no ordinary animal. And now, the Alpha King had arrived. Her heart pounded. Her quiet life, her solitude, her safety, they were gone. All of it shattered in the presence of a being more dangerous, more powerful, and more impossible than she had ever imagined. The storm raged outside, but it was nothing compared to the storm that had just entered her cabin. The wind tore at the cabin walls, rattling the old wood as though it knew something terrible had arrived. Omega's heart raced. She had never seen anyone like him. The figure at the doorway was immense, almost regal, his presence filling the small room as though the cabin itself had shrunk around him. Golden eyes glimmered like molten sunlight against the cold snow. Fur lined his heavy cloak, and his boots sank slightly into the fresh snow at the doorstep. "Who are you?" Omega whispered, her voice small, though she tried to sound steady. "I am the Alpha King," the man said, his voice low and commanding, carrying a weight of authority that made her body tremble. "And this," he gestured toward the space where the wolf had been, now empty, "is mine." Omega's stomach tightened. The realization hit her like ice water. The wolf, the creature she had nursed back to life, belonged to this man. Or, perhaps, more than belonged. It was him, in some way. She had heard stories of shapeshifters in the forest, kings of wolves who could take human form, but she had never imagined she would meet one. And certainly not in her little cabin, in the middle of a blizzard. I didn't know," she stammered, stepping back instinctively. "It was freezing. I couldn't leave it outside. I only wanted to help." The Alpha King's golden eyes studied her, sharp and piercing. For a long moment, he said nothing, and the air seemed to tighten around them. Omega felt small, exposed, yet there was a strange pull toward him, an attraction she could neither explain nor resist. There was danger in those eyes, yes, but also a flicker of something else, something raw and human beneath the cold exterior. "You have courage," he said finally, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "And foolishness." Omega's pulse quickened. She did not know whether to feel proud or terrified. The Alpha King stepped fully into the cabin, closing the door behind him, and the storm outside seemed to shrink away, leaving only the heat of the fire and the tension between them. "Sit," he commanded, nodding toward a chair by the fire. His tone was not cruel, but it brooked no argument. Omega hesitated, then obeyed. The Alpha King removed his cloak, revealing a form both powerful and graceful. Muscles moved under his pale, strong skin, and there was a quiet authority in the way he carried himself, like a king used to being obeyed without question. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Omega's eyes kept drifting to his golden gaze, searching for the humanity that must lie beneath the imposing exterior. He, in turn, seemed to study her, his expression unreadable, as though trying to understand how someone so fragile could have the bravery to care for a creature like him. "You touched me," he said abruptly, "while I was wounded. Do you understand what that means?" I only wanted to help," Omega replied softly. I didn't know. I didn't know who or what you were." The Alpha King's lips pressed together, and for a moment, he looked away, staring into the fire as though lost in thought. Then he turned back to her, voice quieter now. "It is dangerous to trust, and yet, here you are." Omega's throat went dry. She sensed that he was not just speaking of the wolf but of her, of the fragile walls she had built around her life. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, and she felt a surge of something like hope or perhaps defiance stir within her. "You're hurt," she said finally, finding her voice. "I can help you. Please, let me." The Alpha King's eyes narrowed, but not with anger. With reluctance, he nodded. "Very well," he said, and seated himself on the floor near the fire. "But listen carefully. What happens here must remain between us. You cannot speak of what you have seen." Omega nodded solemnly, the weight of his words settling on her. She tended to his injuries with careful hands, wrapping torn fabric around cuts and applying heat to numb the frostbite. The firelight flickered on his face, revealing a scar along his jawline, sharp and deliberate, like a mark of battles fought and victories won. "You are different from others," he said suddenly, voice low. "You did not run. You did not scream. You touched me without fear. Why?" Omega paused. She had never been asked that question before. She thought of the lonely nights, the bitter cold, the way she had felt connected to every creature that crossed her path. "Because I know what it feels like to be lost," she said softly, "to be frozen in fear. I could not leave you out there. I could not." The Alpha King's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, so quickly that she almost thought she had imagined it. Then he said, "Few can claim such bravery. Fewer still. Kindness." His words were rough, almost reluctant praise, but they struck her heart like fire. Hours passed. The blizzard raged outside, but inside the cabin, the world seemed to shrink to the warmth of the fire and the quiet exchange between them. Omega found herself speaking more freely than she had in years, telling him small stories of her life in the forest, of the animals she had known, of the nights she had spent alone. He listened, silent most of the time, but always watching, always alert, as if absorbing every detail. And yet, occasionally, he would ask a question, small and precise, testing her, probing the boundaries of her courage and understanding. As the night deepened, a strange connection began to form, fragile but undeniable. Omega could sense the loneliness behind the Alpha King's commanding exterior. He was used to being obeyed, to being feared and revered, but there was a solitude in him that even his power could not fill. She felt pity, yes, but also a deep, undeniable pull toward him, a yearning to reach the man beneath the wolf's strength. "Tell me," he said finally, breaking the long silence. Do you know what I am? Omega hesitated, then nodded slowly. I think so. You are the wolf. And yet you are more than that. Something powerful, something human too. A faint smile touched the Alpha King's lips, a smile that did not reach his eyes. Yet it was there, fleeting and dangerous. Perhaps, he murmured, perhaps you are the only one who sees me clearly. A sudden noise from outside shattered the fragile moment, a low growl, echoing through the blizzard. The Alpha King tensed immediately, golden eyes narrowing. Every muscle coiled and ready. Omega's heart thumped violently. Stay inside, he ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. Do not move. Omega obeyed, pressing herself against the wall as he rose and went to the doorway. She watched as he disappeared into the snow for a moment, then reappeared, calm but alert, eyes scanning the shadows beyond the firelight. The forest is restless tonight, he said, returning to the cabin. There are others who will seek to claim what you have touched, what you have saved. Omega swallowed hard. What do you mean? You do not understand yet, he said, voice quiet but edged with steel. You saved me. But that act, it changes the balance. There are those who would see me dead for that. And perhaps you too, for daring to interfere. Fear surged through Omega, but beneath it, a strange thrill, a mixture of danger and destiny. She realized that by saving the wolf, she had stepped into a world far larger, far more dangerous, than the quiet life she had known. The Alpha King's gaze softened once more, though his voice remained steady. You have courage, Omega. But the night is far from over. And what begins here will not end easily. Omega nodded, feeling both dread and something like hope. She had glimpsed a world of power, of magic, of danger. And she was a part of it now, whether she wanted to be or not. She knelt by the fire, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, and stole a glance at the Alpha King. He was both terrifying and fascinating, a force of nature bound in human form, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly alive, not just surviving, but drawn into a story greater than herself. Outside, the blizzard continued, howling like a wild animal. Inside, the firelight flickered over two figures bound by circumstance, by fate, and perhaps by something deeper. Neither could deny the tension that crackled between them, an invisible thread of longing, fear, and fragile trust. And then, in the middle of the night, a shadow moved across the snow outside the cabin, unseen by Omega but noticed by the Alpha King. His eyes narrowed, golden and bright, and a low growl escaped his lips. They are coming, he whispered. And they will not wait. Omega's hand tightened on the edge of the chair. She did not fully understand the danger, but she understood enough. Their lives were about to be tested, and the bond between them, already fragile, already charged, would be the only thing that could keep them alive. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm that had just begun inside the cabin. And within the hearts of those two strangers, bound together by fate, danger, and an impossible, growing connection, the blizzard outside howled like a wild beast, rattling the cabin and burying the world in white. Omega pressed her back against the wall, her heart pounding. The Alpha King stood by the doorway, golden eyes glowing, muscles tense, listening. He was silent, but she could feel the storm of thoughts and instincts coursing through him. They are close, he whispered, voice low but firm. You must stay here. Do not move. Omega nodded, though fear and curiosity twisted together in her chest. She watched as he stepped out into the storm, disappearing into the swirling snow. For a moment, the cabin felt empty, fragile, like a candle in the wind. But the Alpha King returned, his coat dusted with snow, eyes sharp and alert. They know I am here, he said. And they will not wait. The forest is filled with those who would see me dead, and anyone who helps me is equally at risk. Omega's mind raced. Then, we need a plan. she said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. We can't just wait for them to come. Maybe we can hide. Maybe we can lead them away. He turned toward her, golden eyes narrowing. You are brave. Foolishly so, he said. But I will not let you face them alone. The tension in the cabin was almost unbearable. The fire flickered, casting long, wavering shadows across their faces, revealing both fear and fascination. Omega could feel it, the pull between them, charged and unspoken, threading through every glance, every movement. She wanted to ask questions, to speak words of comfort or defiance, but she stayed silent, waiting. The first attack came quietly, almost imperceptibly. A shadow moved in the snow outside, faster than human eyes could track. The Alpha King's head snapped toward it. Every muscle coiled. He moved with precision and speed, stepping into the doorway, and a growl ripped from his throat. The snow erupted as figures lunged from the storm. Dark shapes moving with deadly intent. Omega gasped, pressing herself against the wall, frozen by fear and awe. The Alpha King moved with fluid grace, striking, blocking, shifting, like the wolf he once had been. His golden eyes blazed as he fought, each movement precise, powerful, and frightening in its beauty. She watched, heart hammering, as he defended them both, a whirlwind of strength and fury. Her fear began to mingle with awe, and something else, a strange, dangerous admiration. Even in the chaos, she noticed the small gestures. The way he shifted to shield her. The way his eyes flicked toward her, checking to make sure she was safe. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time seemed to stretch and bend in the storm. Finally, the attackers retreated, slipping back into the blizzard, leaving only tracks in the snow and a silence that pressed in around them. The Alpha King turned back to Omega, his chest heaving, eyes still glowing golden. They will come again, he said simply, as if stating a fact. And next time, it will not be so easy. Omega swallowed hard, trying to calm her racing pulse. She wanted to speak, to say something that might bridge the impossible gap between them, but words failed her. Instead, she reached for the small bundle of cloth she had used to bandage the wolf, now a symbol of her care and courage, and extended it toward him. He looked at it, eyes softening slightly. You are persistent, he said, his voice quieter now, almost gentle. I have spent my life commanding, fighting, controlling, and yet, here you are, touching me, seeing me, without fear. Why? Omega thought of the long nights alone in the forest, the animals she had cared for, the wind and snow that had been her only companions. Because I know what it is to be hurt, she said softly, to be cold and alone. I could not leave you out there. For a brief moment, the Alpha King seemed vulnerable, almost human. The tension between them shifted, growing into something heavier, more intimate, yet impossible to name. He reached for the cloth, taking it from her hands with a gentleness that contradicted the predator in him. Hours passed, and the storm outside continued its relentless assault. Inside, the cabin became a sanctuary, a place of fragile trust and unspoken emotion. Omega moved closer, her fear mingling with curiosity, with fascination, with something she could not define. The Alpha King watched her, silent, until finally, he spoke. There is more to this world than you know, he said. More danger, more power, and a curse that binds me. Omega tilted her head, curiosity sharpening despite the fear. A curse? She asked. He nodded. I am bound by an ancient spell, a magic that transforms me, that isolates me from others. The wolf you saved, it is part of me. And perhaps, in saving it, you have also saved a part of my soul. Omega's chest tightened. She did not fully understand, but she felt the weight of his words. The man before her was not just a king of beasts, not just a warrior, he was a prisoner of his own fate. And she had become part of it. I want to help, she said, voice trembling but steady. "If there is a way to break the curse, I want to try." The Alpha King's eyes met hers, golden and bright, filled with a mixture of hope, fear, and something else, something that made her heart ache and burn at the same time. "It is not a simple task," he warned. "The path is dangerous, and those who would see me dead will not hesitate to strike. But perhaps with you, it might be possible." The storm outside began to ease, though the blizzard still raged in the distance. Omega felt a strange calm settle over her, even as the weight of danger pressed in. For the first time, she realized that her life, quiet and sheltered as it had been, was gone. She had stepped into a world of power, curses, and destiny, and at the center of it was the Alpha King, a being of immense strength, mystery, and undeniable pull. That night, as the fire burned low, they spoke quietly. He told her fragments of his past battles fought, enemies vanquished, betrayals endured. She shared pieces of her own story, of solitude and survival, of nights spent listening to the wind and learning the language of the forest. With every word, the invisible thread between them grew stronger, taut with tension, longing, and trust. As the hours slipped away, Omega realized that fear had become fascination, and fascination had become something more. She could not deny it. She was drawn to him, to the power, the mystery, the man beneath the wolf, and he, though reluctant to admit it, was drawn to her courage, her kindness, her gentle defiance. A sudden movement outside snapped them both from their thoughts. The Alpha King's head snapped toward the window, golden eyes blazing. The shadow moved closer, too deliberate to be random, his body tensed, every muscle coiled like a spring. "They are coming again," he said, voice low and fierce. "And this time, there will be no warning." Omega's pulse quickened, fear and adrenaline mingling. She felt the weight of the fire, the warmth of the cabin, and the storm outside, pressing in on all sides. And yet, beneath it all, she felt something else, an undeniable connection, fragile but burning, to the man who was both predator and protector, king and prisoner. The Alpha King moved to the doorway, checking the perimeter, and Omega followed at a careful distance. The storm outside was no longer just snow and wind. It was a battlefield, a place where strength, cunning, and courage would decide who survived. She realized with a thrill of fear and excitement that she would not be left behind. Not now. Not ever. "They will test us," he said, glancing back at her, eyes glowing like molten gold in the firelight. "And we must be ready." Omega nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Her hands shook, but her resolve did not. She had saved a wolf, and in doing so, she had entered a world far larger, far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. And she would not turn away. The night deepened, the storm outside echoing the turmoil within the cabin, and for the first time, both Omega and the Alpha King understood that their fates were intertwined, bound by courage, trust, and a thread of something neither could yet name. And somewhere in the shadows of the forest, the enemy waited, silent, patient, ready to strike. The wind had softened to a cold whistle, but the forest still lay under a blanket of snow, silent and tense. Inside the cabin, Omega and the Alpha King stood side by side, the warmth of the fire failing to chase away the chill that had settled into their bones. They could hear the crunch of footsteps outside, deliberate and methodical, the approach of the rival pack that had been stalking them. Omega's heart pounded, but she did not shrink back. The Alpha King's presence was a shield, yet she knew she would have to be brave, clever, and steadfast if they were to survive the night. "They are testing us," the Alpha King said, voice low, carrying both warning and command. "They will try to drive fear into us. But we cannot falter, not now, not ever." Omega nodded. She had learned much in the past days, much more than just survival. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. And she had learned something else, something dangerous and undeniable. She was drawn to him, to the man beneath the wolf, to the golden eyes that held both power and pain. The cabin door burst open suddenly, snow and ice spraying in, and figures moved into the light of the fire. Dark shapes, eyes glinting with malice, advanced cautiously but swiftly. The rival pack had arrived. The Alpha King stepped forward, body coiled like a spring. "Stay close," he whispered to Omega, his voice soft but firm. She followed instinctively, her fear tempered by the steady, unwavering presence beside her. The fight began. It was swift, brutal, and precise. The Alpha King moved with the grace of a predator and the strength of a warrior, each motion calculated and deadly. Omega watched, awed and terrified, as he dispatched one after another with skill honed by years of survival and battle. Yet he was careful to protect her, shifting positions to shield her from harm. Omega realized that this was more than a fight for life. It was a test of trust, of connection. She could feel his strength, his focus, and his reliance on her presence, even in silence. And in turn, she found her own courage rising, not to fight with swords or claws, but to support him, to stand firm beside him, to be the calm center in the storm. Minutes passed, each one stretching like an eternity. The last of the shadows retreated into the blizzard, leaving the cabin silent once more. The Alpha King leaned against the doorway, golden eyes glowing faintly in the firelight, chest heaving. Omega moved to his side, hands trembling as she brushed snow from his cloak. "You are remarkable," he said, voice quieter now, carrying a weight of admiration and something softer, something he rarely allowed himself to feel. "Few would stand as you did. Fewer still would face fear without faltering." Omega's chest tightened. "I only did what I had to," she whispered. "I could not let them take you. Or the wolf." He turned to her fully, golden eyes searching hers, filled with intensity and a flicker of something more, something tender, vulnerable, and real. "You have changed much in these days," he said. "And perhaps you have changed me." The storm outside had quieted, leaving a fragile stillness in the forest. But the Alpha King's curse, the magic that bound him between forms, had not yet lifted. Omega knew that the golden eyes, the wolf within, were still tethered by power beyond her understanding. "There is a way to break it," she said softly. "A ritual, an act of selflessness. But it requires trust, and courage, and sacrifice." He studied her, and for a moment, the weight of his life, of centuries of power and isolation, seemed to settle heavily on his shoulders. "And you would do this? For me?" "I would," she said without hesitation. "Because I believe in you. And perhaps, because I cannot bear to see you remain trapped." The Alpha King's lips twitched in the faintest shadow of a smile. "Then we begin," he said. They moved outside, into the snow-covered clearing behind the cabin. The moon hung low, casting silver light over the forest, illuminating the frost-covered trees and the glimmering talisman in Omega's hands, the same one that had pulsed with dark magic the moment she had first touched the wolf. The Alpha King stood beside her, tall, commanding, and yet softened by something fragile that only she could touch. He extended a hand, and she took it, feeling warmth and strength radiating through him, an unspoken promise that she was not alone. The ritual was simple in description but impossible in execution. They had to stand together, hearts and minds aligned, focusing on trust, courage, and selfless intent. Omega whispered words she barely understood, guided by instinct and the faint magic of the forest. The Alpha King mirrored her, his voice steady, golden eyes fixed on hers, heart and soul aligned with hers. The talisman glowed, faintly at first, then brighter, casting long shadows across the snow. Wind swirled, carrying the sound of distant spirits, echoes of ancient power. Omega felt it power so vast it was almost overwhelming, yet safe in the Alpha King's presence. He leaned closer, brushing her hand with his, a connection of warmth and trust, and she felt the pull of something deeper, a bond not just of survival, but of destiny. The wolf's form began to shimmer in the clearing, caught between shapes, caught between man and beast. Omega gasped, her heart leaping, as the curse began to unravel before her eyes. Golden light wrapped around the Alpha King, shadows dissolving, power settling into him. And in that moment, he looked at her, not as a king, not as a predator, not as a wolf, but as a man, transformed, redeemed, and alive. The ritual ended. The forest was quiet. The storm of snow reduced to soft flakes, drifting lazily. The Alpha King, fully human now, yet carrying the strength and presence of the wolf within, stepped closer to Omega. He searched her face with eyes that had once held only command and danger, now softened by trust, gratitude, and something that hovered between longing and awe. "You saved me," he said, voice low, reverent, almost tender. "And in saving me, you saved yourself too. You have changed me in ways I cannot name." Omega's hands trembled as she reached for his, and he took them gently, deliberately. We did this together," she said. "And I do not regret it, not for a moment." The Alpha King's golden eyes glimmered, now fully human yet carrying the wildness of the wolf he once was. He smiled, softly, almost shyly, and for the first time, Omega saw not a ruler, not a predator, but a man who could love, who could trust, who could be transformed by courage, care, and connection. The forest around them was still, serene, yet filled with possibility. The night air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and snow, a reminder that the world was vast, mysterious, and dangerous, but also full of beauty and hope. The Alpha King stepped closer, their hands still intertwined. "Omega," he said, voice breaking slightly. I do not know what comes next. But I know this. I cannot imagine facing it without you." Omega's chest tightened. She had never felt so alive, so seen, so bound to another soul. "Then we face it together," she whispered. For a long moment, they simply stood there. Snowflakes settling on their shoulders, hearts beating in a quiet harmony. A bond forged in trust, courage, and the trials of the storm. The curse was broken, the enemy had been driven back, and yet the adventure of their lives was only beginning. Then, in the distance, a faint glimmer of light flickered in the forest, a reminder that the world of magic, power, and destiny was never truly at rest. Yet for now, they had each other. And that was enough. The Alpha King drew her closer, not as a ruler to a subject, not as a predator to prey, but as a man to the woman who had shown him courage, kindness, and a path to redemption. "We are bound now," he murmured, almost to himself. "Not by curse, not by power, but by choice, and by trust." Omega smiled, warmth filling her heart even as the cold wind whispered around them. "Then we will face it together," she said, voice steady, sure, and filled with quiet strength. And in the silver light of the moon, with snow falling softly around them, the Alpha King and Omega stood side by side, no longer bound by fear or curse, but by a bond of courage, love, and a future they would face together. The forest was silent, the storm behind them, yet alive with possibilities. They had survived the night, the danger, and the magic. And though the world beyond the trees remained vast and uncertain, they were no longer alone. For the first time, both of them knew what it meant to be free and what it meant to belong.